Hello everybody and welcome to another episode of Sunday Night Live with me, Jonny Lipsham. If you're new to the show, welcome, good evening, glad that you are here. If you are one of my regulars, and I have a growing number of regulars on the show now, which is awesome. Thank you for coming. You guys are amazing and I really appreciate you guys being here. So it is January 13th, we're in the second week of the year, and already I feel like the year is flying by. So I hope you guys have had a really good week. I've had a busy one, and mostly because half of it was taken up with my kids still being at home for the Christmas holiday. But they are now safely back at school, and they'll be starting a full week this week because they went back on Wednesday. I know it's a little weird. They went back on Wednesday. But they did. They went back on Wednesday and they had basically 2.5 days in school. And it's been a busy time with them and getting them adjusted back to being in school. So that's all been a lot of fun. But it's I tell you, it's been quiet. Having the kids home for like 3 weeks-ish, 2.5 weeks at Christmas time, you know, it's kind of like the house is kind of non-stop. But now that they are back at school and I'm basically here on my own, it's really, really quiet. So, but it's been great. I've been able to really get my head down and get stuff planned out and mapped out for 2019 at Jonny Lipsham Studios. So it's building up to be an awesome year already. And I'm going to say hello to some people because we have a good number of people already here. Tony was the first one in, Tony Stringert, and Kyle Jedruziak is here, and Bobby Booth, Just Bob is here, Martin Weeks, and Johnny Gibe is here too, right on cue. He says, "Howdy!" I say that because it's capital letters. So I hope everyone is all right and had a good week. You may notice that there is a little bit of flickering off over on this side. It's because this light over here is probably about to pack in. Which would be annoying if it does. I'll have to go and buy a new one because they don't actually make bulbs for this yet. If the bulbs go, you have to buy a new light. It's got like built-in LED lights. It's a bit of a weird little contraption. But they're really bright, which is why I use them for lighting my videos and this show, of course. It's much brighter with these guys on than just with normal lights like I was using before. So that would be what that is all about. Johnny Guy with the $50 donation. Thank you very much, mate. I really appreciate that, and I know what that's for, so thank you. Very much appreciated. Who else do we have in here? At the moment I think that's it, but that's awesome. Thanks, Johnny, really appreciate that, buddy. It's been a very busy Christmas for you and I, and a busy new year, and I have to say, if you were at Johnny's 2-hour special yesterday, wasn't it just a totally awesome show? It was so good, and it was so good having a whole bunch of people gathered in Johnny's studio to entertain us all. Just Bob was there, and Jammin' Jay was there, and Steve Ross was there, who I've yet to really connect with, but it'd be really cool to hook up with him. And of course, Drew Sherrod was there as well, which is awesome. And Jeffrey Burr is here, and he says the money is just flying. Yes, it most certainly is. And Johnny says, this year looks good so far. It most certainly does. Dwight L. has just arrived. He says it was great. It was an awesome show, says Bobby. Yes, it really, really was. It was fantastic. I didn't get to watch all of it. I got to, my client was running late. He was about half an hour late. So I got to see the start of the show, which was cool. But then I had to set up for the session with my client. And then we didn't finish until probably about an hour after the show had finished, so I didn't get to see who had won the prizes and all of that. But congratulations to all of those that won prizes. Sheila, I think, won one of them. What did she win? Did she win the Atom? I can't remember whether she won the Atom. I can't remember what she won. And tonight. Joseph won the Skype call with me, which is cool. Looking forward to hooking up with him and getting that sorted so that we can talk through whatever it is he has on his mind that he would like to work through with me for absolutely free. And there was another winner. Yes, you got the atom. Cool. And John Hoekstra is here. He says, hello from Chicago. Awesome. I have family in Chicago. My sister and brother-in-law and their 2 boys live on the outskirts of Chicago, on the northern side of the city. And I have been a good few times to Chicago, and mostly before Jonny and I met. So Jonny and I have not actually met physically yet, which is a great shame. I hope one day we can do that somehow. Don't know how we're going to do it, unless we rob a bank together. Martin is here. He says, didn't see you sneak in there, buddy, talking to Jonny. Yeah, Jonny was right on cue. Let's see. And Rayner's here. He says, good morning. Good morning, Rayner. Yes, it is just after 1 a.m. for you. So I very much appreciate you being here. So yes, the HST special was absolutely outstanding yesterday. It was a shame I couldn't be more of a part of it than I would like to have been, but I was glad to have donated a prize to it. And you know, it's important. Jonny does a lot for the Studio One community and the PreSonus community at large, whether they're Studio One users or whether they use PreSonus hardware. Jonny does an awful lot, because not only does he do excellent Studio One content, but he also does a whole bunch of videos on PreSonus hardware as well. So we are richly blessed by all that he does for us as a whole. I mean, I would not be doing this stream now if it hadn't been for Jonny's input and persuading me to do it, because it was something I was reluctant to do, you know, to make videos, and any thought of streaming really hadn't crossed my mind until Jonny started doing them. And when Jonny started doing streams, I thought, hey, this might actually be a cool way for me to really connect with people in a way that I hadn't before thought of. So thank you, Jonny, for persuading me. And he says, wow, thanks, man. Yeah, absolutely, meant every single word, mate. And John Hoekstra is the perfect example of what I've just been talking about, because he says, using the Faderport 16 as per your recommendation. There you go. And Jonny is hoping to set up John in his studio. That'd be cool. Martin says, Wheeling, ain't that in West Virginia? I believe Wheeling is Illinois. So on the, I think, the southern side of the city of Chicago, I think. I could be wrong there. But yeah, I think that's where it is. So my sister and Jonny are basically opposite sides of the city. So there we go. It was a really, really good show. And I can't actually... Yeah, southwest of Chicago town, says Deer Creek, who is here. Hey, Chris, good to see you, mate. So tonight's show, what are we going to talk about? What's on your guys' mind? Normally I would have something. Normally I'd have something that we can talk about and something that we can demonstrate. Or normally I would like to. But today I've been in a right old rush because I have spent the day the other side of town. I was at a studio this morning doing some vocal tracks for another client. Normally I do my vocal tracks from here, but he wanted me to go out to his studio. So I went out to his studio, which is nice, and I got to see his studio. He has a really, really, really cool studio. He has so many microphones. I have never seen so many microphones in a home studio. And it really is a home studio, but it pretty much takes up the entirety of his apartment. So the lounge is like the control room, and then he has like other bedrooms. He has 3 bedrooms, I think. One is his own personal bedroom, and then the other 2 bedrooms are booths. So he has a drum room, and then he has a vocal room. And it's very, very cool. It's a great little place, and he's soundproofed the whole thing so neighbors don't complain ever, which is amazing. It's a great studio, but he has like a whole cabinet that runs along the whole hallway from one end of the apartment to the other, and there are doors all along this cabinet, and they are clearly labeled, and each one has microphones and connect microphone clips and shock mounts and all sorts of stuff. But he has hundreds of microphones. So anyway, I think that's probably why he wanted me to go to his studio, because he wanted to use some of his mics rather than my Rode NT1A. He has a Rode NT1A, which he uses a lot, but that's beside the point. Yeah, Johnny says, tell us some of your experience of doing music for film. I will certainly do that. Absolutely. That's a good question. And Martin seconds that as well. Yes, I can certainly do that. So I was at my friend's doing vocal sessions this morning, and then straight over to church for the evening service, because I was playing bass in the evening. And then I had to wait 40 minutes in the freezing cold to get home. It's absolutely freezing out there and pretty slippery underfoot, so I was kind of like trying not to fall over with my bass on my in my case on my back on the way home. And then I got home not that long ago, actually. Had dinner and then straight in here basically to talk to you guys. So you guys want to know about my experience of working in film, and there's a low end question which I will get to as well. Where's that low end question? I'm gonna have to try and scroll up and find that. Oh, it was Kyle that had the low end question. Well, if he did, I don't see it. I'm trying to find your question, Kyle. Second Kyle's question about low end, since so much of the so-called modern music really does emphasize the low end. Kyle, can you repost the question? I can't seem to find it. Yeah, I can't seem to find your question, Kyle. And Sheila's here, and she says hello. So, working in film. Kyle, if you could repost that question, I'd appreciate that, because I can't seem to find it. Makes a mistake managing the low end. Okay, cool. Well, I have a video on managing the low end as well, but that's fine. We can talk about both of those. We can combine the two subjects. Okay, so I'll start with working in film. Working in film, I'm not sure. I mean, that's really broad. So I can talk mostly about my experience of being as a session musician in an orchestra, but I have done some writing for film as well, and both from both perspectives, it's actually quite complicated, to be honest. Being in the orchestra, you're watching sections of the film whilst you're playing your parts. But you're the whole thing is kind of devoid of context. Half the films I work on, and have worked on, I have no idea what the film is about until I go see it. Most of the films that I work on are what you would call B films. I've only done maybe a couple of features, major features, being in the orchestra. And one of those was the series The Pacific, if you've ever seen that, the HBO series, which is made by Spielberg and Hanks. I was in the orchestra for that series, and we did all the cuts, all the cues, in about 3 days in Angel Studios in London. And I've been to Angel Studios a lot. When I lived in London, I did a lot of work there. Um, so a lot of it is kind of you're devoid of context because you don't do the cues in chronological order. So we don't do, right, okay, we're going to do the main titles, then we're going to do the first cue for the first scene, and then we'll move on and do all the cues in chronological order. We don't work like that. Quite oftentimes the way it works is you do the shortest cues first and then you get to the end of the session, maybe the final day is reserved for doing the longer cues. And we've always got reserve days. So if it's 3 days, there's always maybe a day in lieu as well, just in case we need it for doing any overdubs and that kind of stuff. But hopefully there are no overdubs to do. But as I say, nothing's done in sequence, so you're watching sequences of film completely out of context. And some of the cues are really, really short. They can be like 3 seconds or less. In fact, I can remember setting up for one cue where I think it took us about 5 minutes to set it up. And it was a 1 second cue. Basically, the whole orchestra had to play one chord on a very short note. But we had to play it exactly at the same time. Everybody had to play their note exactly the same time. So I think we did 5 takes of this 1 second cue. And basically it was a case of, in editing, they would pick the best one, ultimately. So that was how that worked. But we didn't have the visual reference for that cue because that hadn't been shot yet. So all we knew was the script required this cue, so we recorded it, and then they would put it all together later in editing. So they'd shoot the scene, then they'd put the music that we had already recorded for this particular cue in place. And basically it was like, the orchestra set up and 1, 2, 3 and that was it. And we did 5 takes of that. And it's just like, okay, what was that all about? And then we moved on to the next one. And the next one, the whole orchestra had to be in situ, but the whole orchestra, so everyone sat there, and then for the next couple of cues, it was just maybe a couple of little, a solo violin line and then an oboe line. And that was it. We moved on to the next cue. But we all had to be sat there. And so I'm sat there with my bass, trying to be as still and as quiet as possible and all of that, even though I was in a booth, and could have made more noise because I could just like turn my mute my amp or turn my volume pot down and that kind of stuff. But because we had a talkback mic in the booth, and I had a camera so that everybody could see me and the conductor could see me and I could see the conductor. So I had a screen and everything. So, from that point of view, I'm completely separated from the orchestra because I'm in a booth and nobody can see me physically. I'm having to watch a screen so I can see the conductor. And the only way I can talk to the conductor is via the talkback mic. And the talkback mic broadcasts to the whole orchestra as well. So if I've not muted my mic when they're doing like a cue for just the violin and a flute, for example, and I forget to mute my talkback mic, everyone else can hear me, munching on whatever I'm munching on in between cuts. So that's always really interesting to do. Now so that's really from the session musician's perspective. You have to be phenomenally well prepared, which means you have to be very well practiced. You have to be able to sight read because you get the charts on the day and you play them and it goes straight down. It goes straight down into Pro Tools and that's it. And if I make a mistake, because I'm in a booth and I'm playing my bass, for example, if I make a mistake on my bass, it's fine. The orchestra, everyone will just carry on, providing they've not been put off. And that's led to a whole, series of other mistakes. If that happens, then we have to recut that cue. But if it's just like I've just made my mistake, but everybody else has carried on and nobody's otherwise noticed, then the reserve day, I have to come in. I have to come in on that reserve day. Nobody else will be there. It'll just be me and the producer, the composer, and the recording engineers, and I have to do all of my overdubs. So the few overdubs I can do, the better. So I really have to have my A game when I'm doing a film score. Now, when it comes to composing for film, I have a bit of a different way of working. I've not worked on features ever, because I'm not at that level yet, but I'd like to be one day. So I'm not at a David Arnold or Michael Kamen or John Williams level. I mean, John Williams is like the ultimate film composer. Michael Kamen is a wonderful film composer. James Horner was awesome. I'm not anywhere near that kind of level. Any films that I have written music for have been for student films, for Edinburgh University film students, or for I've written music for videos, which have got like they're not really advertising videos, but they are kind of like, because adverts tend to be like, 15, 20 seconds. I've written music more for longer form pieces that would maybe advertise a company. So maybe it's kind of like to pitch an idea for a company, or pitch a product or a concept. So I've written music for those kind of things rather than commercials. And I have a bit more of an interesting way of doing that. I tend to sit and watch the video first, and I'll watch the video through a couple of times. And whilst I'm watching, in my head, I'm developing ideas. I'm developing themes. I'm kind of watching it and going, okay, what's the tempo of this? Oftentimes they'll give me a tempo, and that's what I write to. And they'll suggest a style. They'll say, I want, kind of like electro rock, synth rock. They'll maybe say, because this is about unveiling our new car, for example. Let's say it's a new sports car that's being unveiled, and it's like a 3-minute video all about this brilliant, fantastic new sports car. So they'll want something really snappy, up-tempo, and they'll maybe say, okay, we want synths, and we want fast drums. We want something that's really sharp and that kind of thing. So I have to kind of write with those kind of ideas, those kind of concepts in mind. And they usually give me a tempo. They'll say, right, the tempo for this is 140. You have 2 minutes and 39 seconds. And you have to be done, finished at 2 minutes 39 seconds, because the voiceover guy comes on at the end and does the last 8 seconds of the video. So it really is down to precision. So quite oftentimes they'll say you have 2 minutes 37.37 seconds, and I have to measure that out in what the tempo is, how many bars that's going to be. So there's a little bit of maths involved. So, okay, I've got so many seconds, effectively, and I've got so many beats in the bar, and I have to do a little bit of division, and that tells me how many bars I have. If that means I have to put in a couple of bars in an unusual time signature to accomplish that, I do it. You just have to do what you have to do to make it work. So, sometimes I'll have something that's in 4/4, has a nice pumping groove to it, nice sort of synthy kind of thing to it, and it's pumping away in 4/4, and then right at the end there's a bar of 7/16 and a bar of 3/8, and then we finish. And that's just what you have to do to make sure that it finishes exactly when the director wants it to finish, not a nanosecond later. So, writing for film or writing for video, for those kind of things, is pretty challenging, because the brief will be really quite specific about what they want, the kind of sound that they want, the kind of style that they want, the tempo that it has to be, and the exact length that you've got. The rest of it's up to you, up to your creativity. And you know, they'll say kind of like harmonically what they want. You know, they may say, hey, we want something more straight ahead rock. Okay, well, that tells me immediately kind of the harmonic palette I need to use. Or they'll say, you know, maybe a little bit of rock, a little bit of, you know, funk. Okay, well, that tells me the harmonic palette I can play with there. Or, you know, they'll say, hey, we want this to be, you know, 1960s R&B/soul style for this particular thing. That, again, that informs my harmonic palette, that informs my instrumentation, that informs my orchestration, and some of my phraseology. Quite a lot of the composition work is done right there in those, this is the style we want it to sound like. Okay, well, there's a vocabulary. All you're telling me is, you know, effectively, you're saying to me, I want you to write 3 paragraphs in German, but it has to be, you know, it has to be exactly this number of words. Great. I'm writing in German, and that's it. So, you know, I have a vocabulary. I have a tonality straight away, because they've told me what the style is that they want. They've suggested, hey, we want something synthy. Okay, synths. Great. That suggested my orchestration right away. And it's just like, in the information they give you, a lot of the compositional work is done, because in my head I'm going, okay, there's this vocabulary, synth, a lot of that kind of synthy rock kind of music has this kind of phraseology, these phrases crop up, these melodic concepts are there, it has this harmonic palette. Great. And seriously, 2/3 of the composing work is done in that first meeting with the director. So that's my way of working anyway. Now, if I was working on a feature film, it would be a whole different kettle of fish. And, you know, Hans Zimmer has a masterclass on film composing. And if you have any interest in writing music for film whatsoever, go and purchase that masterclass, because it's brilliant. It's really, really good. He is very, very thorough on how he gets his ideas down onto a piece of paper. And one of the first things he says is, the first thing that he would say to a director is, I have absolutely no idea how to do your film. Because every film is a blank piece of paper. That's how it starts. It starts with information from the scriptwriters, information from the director, information from the producers. And that immediately starts to put notes on the paper before he's even started putting notes on the paper, so to speak. So there you go. There's a little bit of my experience. Martin says, so Vegas and Studio One make for a good 1-2 punch for this kind of work. It might. It might. The tricky bit with Studio One is writing to picture, because Presonus don't really have that kind of sewn up yet. You can import video into Studio One. There is a video track that you can use, but the thing with that is you can write your music to the picture, but you can't export the two together. You have to export them separately, then marry them together in video editing software. But as I say, it's not entirely 100% sewn up yet. It's not really something I don't think they have fully explored yet. But I'm sure going down the road, you know, they will do that. I'm confident that addressing the needs of film composers is on the roadmap somewhere. Who knows which version of Studio One that will be in? I don't know. I hope that it's relatively soon, though. Most film composers would use something like Cubase or Nuendo, because Cubase and Nuendo absolutely are fantastic for writing for film, because the integration with certain video software and Nuendo is really, really good. They've got that really buttoned up, mostly because they've been in the business for a lot longer than PreSonus have. PreSonus have only had a DAW since 2009. So we're only talking like 10 years of Studio One. Nuendo and Cubase have been around for 30 years. So, of course, they're going to have a lot of this kind of stuff in place already for a lot of years. And they're going to be really fantastically good at it. I'm not knocking Studio One. I'm not knocking PreSonus. I just, it's young. It's only 10 years old. You can't expect a 10-year-old boy to go and, get a job as a car mechanic or as a flight engineer on a plane. Which is an adult thing, right? So, that's kind of my take on that. Let's see. You guys have got quite a lot of questions, so I'm going to try and pitch up here and see what the chat is. Jonny says in large capital letters, "Hit that like button, folks!" Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to try and scroll my way through the chat and try and find some of these questions. Deer Creek says, Sheila's asking if I ever desired wanting a subwoofer. Never used one. The ones I hear on TV sets sound disgusting. Depends on your room, whether you need a sub or not. This room, I don't need one. Previous room, didn't need one. Previous room to this one was too small for a sub. You have to remember, folks, that a 40 hertz wave, a 40 hertz sine wave, is 16 feet long. So, if your room is less than 16 feet long, by the time that note leaves the speaker, it will not have fully run out of energy before it hits the back wall of your studio. This is not a 16-foot room. The back is only probably about 14 feet away. So by the time the sound hits there on a 40 hertz sine wave, it's going to hit there and it's going to come back. So I'm going to get at least some bass build up. The longer this long wall is, the better. My previous studio, it was 9 feet. So basically audio was crashing into my back wall in the corners and building up as it started to come back in, reflected off the wall and building up in the corners. You can deal with that with bass trapping. That's why we have bass traps. That's what they're there for. They're there because, hey, most rooms are not longer than 16 feet long. So those 40 hertz waves are not going to be fully developed before they crash into a wall. So that's what bass trapping is all about. So you can control the low end in your room with bass trapping. Really, I personally think you would only need a sub in your room if the dimensions of your room warrant it. Otherwise, I think most good quality speakers that are at least 5 inch, the woofers are at least 5 inch in size, are going to give you more than enough low end to fill a reasonable size room. This is 14, 12 across, 14 back, I think. So, reasonably good size. It's going to fill, bass is going to fill the room quite nicely. Now, what I found in my old room was, because it was only 9 feet long, when I went and stood at the door in my old room up against the back wall, there was a ton of bass at the back there. And, bass was kind of nicely managed around this area because of the bass trapping. But had I taken that bass trapping away, that bass energy would have started flooding the room, and it would have become unmanageable. And to be honest, having a sub in a room that's 8 by 9 is just stupid, because all you do is you just flood the room with bass. That's not going to help you attain a good balance mix, in my opinion. So no, I don't desire a sub. Johnny says, I have a subwoofer, but I rarely use it for mixing. My Aries 44s have plenty. Yeah, exactly, because I think those have 6-inch woofers, I think, if I'm not mistaken. Let's see. Just Bob asks, do any of the film scores get recycled into other products? And if so, does that generate any extra income? Most of the work that I do for film, if I'm doing work for student films, they are bespoke products. So, you know, the music that I write for student films is specifically for that film. It doesn't make its way into another film. I think I get where you're getting at, though, because John Williams, the great film composer, has done a lot of Spielberg films, and quite often you find thematic material from E.T. cropping up in Star Wars films, and Indiana Jones, and, you know, there's a whole bunch of films that he's done, and you find some of his thematic material cropping up in different films, like Luke Skywalker's theme in the first of the old Star Wars films, was it Episode 4? You find Luke's little theme there, which is played on a French horn. You find that cropping up in Indiana Jones films, and you're just like, why is that there? But it's a little in joke by Williams. It's one of his signatures. Is that he likes to make reference to other films that he's worked on. It's a little bit of an in-joke. And here's the interesting thing about that. Spielberg does the same. For example, if you watch, I forget which Indiana Jones film it is, but there's a car chase scene in Chinatown somewhere, and they go past a club called Club Obi-Wan, which is a clear reference to Star Wars, because when they shot that film, I think they'd either just shot or had just released Star Wars, the Episode 4, I think. So, you know, Spielberg does that, John Williams does that from a musical point of view, and I think lots of other film composers do it. I know James Horner does it as well. Some of his other film thematic ideas, he recycles them and uses them. And, you know, an eager pair of ears, and you'll hear different thematic material come up, and you go, oh, that's Luke's theme, or oh, that's Leia's theme from Star Wars. What's that doing in this Indiana Jones film? Or what's that doing in E.T.? Or whatever. So, yes, those kind of things do happen, but do they generate you extra income? No, they don't. Because you're hired to write the score for that film. You do get a cut of the royalties, however, so if that film goes on to make a lot of money and does really, really well at the box office, then you're going to do really well as the film composer. So that's how it usually works with big feature films. Students' films are a little bit different. But as for me and my music, I recycle all the time. Bobby says, since just about everyone is getting into the film industry, I'll stick to music mixing. Well, you know what? There would be no music for film if there were no mixing engineers to mix it. Okay? You know, a film score needs mixed just as well as an album needs mixed. You're just dealing with a lot more tracks, a lot more channels of audio. You know, you can be dealing with 250 channels of audio because as the mixing engineer, you're not just mixing the music, you're mixing the dialogue. And now, granted, sometimes you'll have a specific engineer that does the dialogue mixing, and then you'll have a sound effects mixer who will do the sound effects mixing, and then those will be bussed as maybe as stereo files, and then they'll be brought into the main mix. And then they balance that with the orchestral mix for the score. But you know, films wouldn't sound so good if there were no mix engineers. So mix engineers are just as important to film as they are to television, as they are to radio, as they are to CDs and vinyl and streaming. You know, wherever there is music, you need a mix engineer. Wherever there is dialogue, you need a mix engineer. Wherever there is sound effects, you need a mix engineer. So I don't see the distinction, personally. A mix engineer is a mix engineer. Now, does that mean I would, because I predominantly do music, that I'd never do dialogue? Well, I do dialogue regularly, actually. I do audiobooks a lot, and I do radio plays occasionally as well. So, I get to mix dialogue as well as mixing music, and they're different. There's a different discipline required, but it's still mixing. It's just as much fun as mixing a radio play as it is mixing an album, in my opinion. But yeah, everyone has their niche, and everyone has their has their things that they're good at, their special skills. Martin says, folks still need a good studio to mix in and record. Some folks still prefer a real hands-on approach. Yep. I don't know why I was singing randomly there, but I'm trying to scoot through and find questions. Martin says, believe it or not, although Mixcraft is not the best DAW around, good but not Studio One, its video sync for music is really solid. Yeah, I've heard that too. I heard that Mixcraft 7 is particularly good. Again, still wouldn't use it. Deer Creek says, I'm recording more and more audio directly into Vegas so you can sync the music versus using Personas and transferring back and forth. Martin says, does Vegas allow for individual musical instrument tracks or just a stereo mix? Martin asks, wouldn't time stretch features of Studio One help with that timing issue? No, not necessarily. Because if you're dealing with a specific cue that has a specific amount of time, the music has to be to tempo. So time stretching it or time compressing it, all that's going to do is make the audio either longer or shorter, but it'll not necessarily be to tempo. So, if I've got, let's say I've got a particular scene and they want some, and they want some, it's a romantic scene, so they want some nice romantic music, but 2/3 of the way through the scene, let's say it's a restaurant, and there's this young couple, and they're having dinner together, and the guy wants to propose to his beautiful girlfriend. And so they're in this beautiful Italian restaurant having gorgeous Italian food. And so what they want musically is something nice and soft and romantic. So maybe piano with some strings. Maybe because it's a restaurant, maybe slightly jazzy, maybe have a bit of a jazz standards kind of vibe to it. But you have to, your music cue is exactly 36.1 seconds long. And it's at a tempo of 65 beats per minute. So that's what you have to write to. It can't slow down. It has to be 65 beats per minute all the way through, right to that even 0.1 of a second. So time stretching won't help you, because time stretching, all it does is just stretch out and elongate a sound wave. Or it compresses the sound wave depending upon which way you're dragging it, of course. But time stretching won't help you make sure that you make up that 0.1 of a second, because that 0.1 of a second is now outside of the 65 beats per minute. So you're wanting nice romantic. So that's kind of the sound that they want for the scene. So that's what you write for. But let's say that's 36.1 seconds, And then immediately after that, the next cue is where that scene gets interrupted because a guy bursts into this scene with a sawn-off shotgun and he's holding the restaurant up for cash from the till because he's a desperate man. So all of a sudden, this beautiful, peaceful scene is broken really, really violently. So I have to make sure that I have 36.1 seconds precisely of nice romantic jazz ballad music, which is immediately broken by when the guy breaks through the door. And then suddenly I'd be... and the mood changes instantly. So that kind of thing has to happen on a pinpoint accuracy. So time stretching wouldn't really help particularly. I can see why you might suggest it as kind of a way to make sure that you have precision, but really what you need is precision rather than stretching and compressing time, which is why you would either use small changes in tempo, or more likely I would, that little thing I played there was in 6/8, so I might drop in a couple of bars of 9/16 or something like that, without changing my phraseology. So I'm still keeping that nice triplet thing going, but I would then, the actual number of beats in each bar would change. So you would have what we would call a hemiola effect. What is hemiola effect, you're wondering? Hemiola effect is where you have one time value in the time of another time value. So I might have 3 quarter note beats in the time it would normally take you to play 2 quarter note beats. And that's where you get your hemiola effect going on. So you'd have 3/2. Or in the case of 9/16, I'd have 9/4. And so, that kind of rhythm would continue, but it would be kind of going over this 9/16 thing. And that would make sure that I end exactly on that when the guy breaks down the door with the sawn-off shotgun and says, "This is a hold up, give me all your money." Suddenly the tempo changes to 160 beats a minute from 65. Okay? So I hope that explains that. Am I going to get to that low-end question? I hope so. Kyle, I hope you're being patient and you're still watching, because I do want to get to your managing low-end question. I'm going to go down to the bottom, and Sarge is here. Sergeant Music. Howdy, Sarge. Good to see you, mate. Sarge is in the house. Let's see. I hope Kyle's is still here. Mike's Tune is here. He says an alternative to do UVI media as collision effects by Sound Yeti. Worth checking out if you're looking for trailer type sounds. Yes. Sheila says, "Oh, I like that piano progression." Yeah, I just kind of improvised that. It basically I just improvised a vaguely sort of jazz 50s blues ballad style thing in E flat, E flat major, G minor 9, C minor, then F minor to B flat 7 flat 9, going around that. It's nice and romantic. You could stick an alto sax over the top of that and make it even more romantic, and maybe have some strings as well to make it just to really pull out as much saccharine from the scene as you can. And then bang, in comes our armed robber. So, Martin, I hope that answers your question. And I would really like to get to Carl's question, because we've got about 9 minutes to do it in. So I am prepared to run over a little bit, because that kind of film question kind of took up a lot of time. So the film question took up a lot of time. So let's get to the managing the low end. How do you manage the low end in your mix? There are many and various ways of doing it. The one that I tend to favor is high-pass filtering. What is a high-pass filter? Nobody knows what a high-pass filter is. I'm going to show you what a high-pass filter is. I'm fairly confident that most of you guys know what a high-pass filter is, but that's okay. If you don't, let's go take a look. So I'm going to bring in this Pro EQ, and I'm going to park it on this trumpet here. So in our... Oh, you're not seeing any of this because I forgot to change the screen. Hang on a second. There we go. I forgot to change the scene. Sheila says, thanks. I'll try that on my keyboard without the gunshots, though. Mine says go for it, and thanks. All good. Okay, good. I'm glad that I hope that answered your question, Martin. And yeah, if you've got any further questions on that particular concept specifically, then yeah, we can talk offline. Just drop me a PM. That'd be fine. Okay, so if you don't know what a high pass filter is, I'm going to show you. Where's my mouse gone? It's over on the other screen. There we go. So here's the Pro EQ by Presonus. And over here you see this LC. LC stands for low cut. If we go over here, HC stands for high cut. Now, here's the thing. In the audio world, we have two names for the same thing quite often. So the low cut here is also known as a high pass filter. And I'll explain kind of what that means. So low cut basically means you cut the low end. So when I engage that, you get this little slope here. So basically anything below this slope here, as you can see by this grading area, is rolled off. That means any frequencies are going to be cut by this slope here. And I can roll this up. At the moment it's 75 Hertz, but I can increase the frequency. I can roll it up to about 221 just for now. And you can basically see that anything below this curve here, frequencies are not going to go through. So we call it a low cut filter because it cuts the lows. It's also known as a high pass filter. Why is it called a high pass filter? I don't know. But essentially what it means is that the highs are allowed to pass through. So anything above this curve is allowed to pass through the EQ. And anything below the curve is not allowed to pass through. You shall not pass. You shall not pass go. You shall go directly to jail and not collect your $200. Okay? That's essentially what that means. So that's why we call it a high pass filter. Conversely, up the top here, we have a high cut. Can you see what it's doing? What's it doing? It's high cutting. It's cutting the highs, is what it's doing. And again, this gets called it gets called a low pass filter. Why? I don't know. But essentially what it means is it means that the lows are allowed to pass through, but the highs have to go to jail. That's how I like to think of it, because these kind of thoughts keep me entertained and amused when I'm mixing. And it's also the weird way that my mind works. So I hope that that helps. How do I manage the low end? I manage the low end by, let me turn that off, by mostly by high pass filtering, but I don't do too much of it. If you do too much high pass filtering, you can end up with a mix that when you take it out of your room, just sounds really, really thin, and there's no low end in your mix. And you really don't want that. So you want your mix to be nice and fulsome and round in the low end, but not overwhelming or overpowering. So the way you do that is by balancing the low end. I mean, managing is a good word, but I prefer balancing the low end. And I balance the low end by a combination of compression and high pass filtering, low cut filtering, whichever you want to call it. I don't really mind, so long as you know what it does. That's the important thing. So that's what I try to do. And Kyle, if you're still in, I hope that you have seen this. If not, then maybe you'll catch that on the replay. And I apologize for taking ages over the film question. But I hope I hope all of this stuff is helping. I'm actually going to see how many people we have in the room, because I've not been looking. We've got 17. 17's not bad at all. It'd be nice if I could get up towards, kind of what Jonny is seeing in his shows now. I mean, he has like 50. Easy. We get to 50 in an instant on Jonny's shows now. So I would like to get up towards that level as well. So if you guys know people that you think would like what I do on my shows, then please do invite them. Please tell them about this show. If you think it's valuable to you, then it's likely going to be valuable to somebody else. And if it's valuable to somebody else, then hopefully they will also do the same thing. So hit the like button. If you're subscribed, great. If you're not subscribed, hit the subscribe button right now and hit that notification bell. That way you'll know when my next video comes out or my next stream comes out. So Kyle, if you're still here, I hope that answers your question. So I would use a combination of high pass filtering, and be careful with it. Don't high pass filter too much. Otherwise your mix will get a little bit too thin. So what I tend to do, if it's a vocal track, I tend to dial this thing up until the vocal gets thin, and then I dial it back until I think, okay, there's a nice balance between the nice richness of the low end of the vocal and the upper frequencies are not getting hidden. They're not getting masked. You know, they're allowed to shine through. Because low end energy, low frequencies take up a lot more energy than upper frequencies. And that's because of the length of the waves, like I was talking about earlier when we're talking about whether you need a sub in your room or not. And I talked about wavelengths. Well, you know, a 40 hertz wave is 16 feet long. So it has a lot more energy than a 12K wave, which is really, really short. You know, it's high frequencies. It's vibrating the air very, very quickly, and therefore it runs out of energy very quickly. So high frequencies will get masked very quickly by lows if you've got too much low in your mix, and you start thinking, gosh, this mix sounds dull. It sounds thick. It sounds muddy. There's no high definition to it. It just sounds dark. Well, your first instinct when you're new to mixing, your first instinct is to do this and roll this back. Maybe not that much, but certainly jack up the high end. That's your first, you know, when you're new to mixing, that's your first instinct is, hey, there's not much highs going on in this mix. So you crank it and you think that that's fixed the problem. It hasn't really. It's maybe enhanced it a little, but it certainly hasn't fixed the problem. If you want the upper frequencies to come through in your mix and be exposed nicely, go and take care of the low end. Roll out some of the low end, roll out some of the low mids as well. So, you know, anything between like 300 to 550 tends to be a bit of a low mid build up area in pretty much most audio that you would record. Even if you record it with a fantastic microphone, you might find that you're still going to get that little build up there. So pull those things out first. Deal with pulling out low end first, and see if you can get the high end to come back through without adjusting it. Okay, see if you can get the high end to come through without adjusting it here, just simply by scooping out with a low cut filter and with a low mid bell cut as well. And what do I mean by a bell cut? This is a bell cut. So anything that looks kind of like that, find that problem area. How do you find it? One way would be to boost it, extreme boost like this, until you hear something that a frequency that just sticks out, consistently sticks out. And I don't mean just sticks out because that's the particular note that's being played or particular note that's sung. You'll know that it's a particular note that's being sung because when it moves to the next note, that frequency goes away. But if there is a consistent sticking out frequency, you'll know that it's that frequency because when the vocalist or the instrument moves to the next note, it's still there. That resonance is still there, and you can just pull it out. And you should find that by pulling it out, you don't have to pull it out by a lot. You know, maybe even by like 3 or 4 dB, that suddenly the high end starts to come through because you've taken out some low end energy. And that gives some space for the high ends to come through. So if you want to manage the low end when you manage the low end of your mix, you will automatically be managing the high end of your mix at the same time. For by removing low end energy, you allow the highs to come through just by default. So that's a really good way to manage the low end and the high end of your mix, is just by tackling low end problems. So I hope that that helps answer that question. Give me a. We are going to overrun, and I don't mind. Bobby says, "Don't do it on the kicks, bass guitar, and I don't do it on the toms." Well, actually, I do. Each to their own. But here's what I do on a bass guitar. What I would do on a bass guitar. Now, I could do it in this. This is an upright bass, and it's maybe a little bit of a different track, a different style of music than what you would ordinarily mix, Bobby. But what I would do with a bass guitar, if I just grab that Pro EQ again and just bung it on here, what I would do with a bass guitar typically is I would have a low cut or a high pass filter, but I would maybe cut below 35 or below 40. So maybe I would cut as close to 40 as I can. And the reason why I do that is because even down here, you're still going to have low rumble that you don't need, because the lowest note on a 4-string bass is an E, which is 40 hertz. So anything below 40 hertz, you're not going to need. And it's just taking up energy in your mix, which will free up higher end in your mix. The same with toms, actually. You want to get the fundamental tone, the fundamental note of the toms, and maybe you want to get some of the overtones to come through, but you don't want the overtones of the drum to dominate. You want the fundamental tone to come through nicely. But again, there is some low-end energy that, for example, some sympathetic vibrations. Let's say between every time the kick drum is played, the floor tom will vibrate sympathetically. Now, if you've got a gate set up, that might not be an issue. Or if you have an expander. Excuse me. If you have an expander set up, again, that might not be an issue either. But here's the thing. If you don't have those things applied on a particular track, that little sympathetic vibration in that floor tom is going to be picked up by the floor tom mic every time the kick drum is played. And that may well have some influence on the tone that you're getting from the kick drum. You might find that when you're mixing the kick drum, if you're mixing the kick drum in context with the rest of the drum set, you might find that as you're mixing that kick drum, you think, there's a funny wee honky frequency here. I'm going to pull it out from the kick drum. But as you're pulling out from the kick drum, it's not going away. Why is that? It's because that's the floor tom vibrating sympathetically. Go to that floor tom and take out that particular kick drum frequency from the floor tom. And you can do that with a high pass filter. Nothing wrong with that. But certainly maybe some of the higher toms, I might not high pass them. I might a little bit. I might, get rid of the super lows. Because, heck, there's going to be no information there. But it will certainly get recorded. There are frequencies generated on a little 8-inch tom, for example. When that's struck, there are still frequencies below 40 hertz that are generated by the impact, and possibly even by room reverberation or any other sympathetic vibrations that might be going on. So you can get rid of those with a high pass filter, and you can do that without destroying the integrity of the fundamental tone of that drum. That would be kind of my thinking on it, but that's not to say that you're wrong. It's just, that's the way that I like to get toms cleaner sounding, so that the fundamental tone really comes through and dominates. And yet, I'm still getting some of not all of the overtones, but some of them, the ones that are good, the ones that are kind of maybe in quote-unquote harmony with the fundamental frequency, or where those overtones provide a pitch bend. Like, for example, back in the late 70s and early 1980s, it was really common to tune one of the lugs on the toms down by maybe a turn and a half of the drum key. The reason why you do that is because that one slightly detuned lug would mean that that little sector on the drum was detuned. So when you strike the drum, the rest of the drum maintains its frequency, but this little out of tune overtone doesn't. And it provides the illusion, the aural illusion. I see aural for sound, or for hearing illusion. It creates the aural illusion of a pitch bend. The pitch bend isn't necessarily real, because the head is not being bent or pushed in or anything like that. It's an illusion. Your ears are being betrayed into thinking there's a pitch bend. There isn't really. But that was, if you go and listen to Steely Dan's Asia, listen to Steve Gadd's toms. Now, he's using a Yamaha 9000 series drum set on that record. And he's got 4 toms. He's got a 10, 12, a 14, and a 16 floor, I think. The 14 and 16 floor toms, I think, was his configuration then. He had them tuned quite low for that record. But he had a pitch bend on each one of those toms. Have a listen to how those sound. They are some of the best tom recordings I think I've ever heard. Not to mention that Black Beauty snare drum that he used is just gorgeous. But yeah, that to me is how I would clean up toms in particular. Toby Phillips is here. Hey Toby, good to see you. He says, nice one, Johnny. Good lesson on EQ. I appreciate that. I'm just going to go back to the other screen so you can see me. Hello. Kirk says, agreed, just Bob. I'm a big proponent of subtractive EQ. Yes, absolutely. Cut first and then boost, as John Hoekstra also says. Bobby says, okay, I'll try that. Good. Let's see. Just Bob says, in fact, everyone there was great yesterday. We gelled nicely. Yes, you certainly did, and it was a great show. You guys were fantastic. You were also hilarious. Yeah, it was good. It was a great show. So, folks, I hope that that's answered your questions on managing the low end, and you got a little bit more of a in-depth kind of thing on EQ in general there as well to go with that. Now, I do have an EQ series on my channel, and I have a compression series on my channel. If you're a subscriber to my email list, which I hope you all are, but if you're not, follow the link in the description below, guys, because there is a link there that takes you to my email list. Now, when you sign up for my email list, you get instant access to that video series on compression. Yes, it is up on my YouTube channel. Everyone gets to see it. But the difference is, if you're on my email list, you get to download those videos and keep them for yourself on your computer. No adverts will play. So you get to watch those back to back in their raw state without YouTube's processing and certainly without their commercials. God bless you, YouTube. I thank you very much for the AdSense money for commercials and stuff, but you know what I'm saying, guys. So those are yours, and you also get the stems to my song Chanel from my EP Belonging to Tomorrow, which was made in 2016. I have a new EP coming this year, guys. Looking forward to sharing that with you, and I'm going to be doing some tutorials on how I mix my EP this year. So I'm going to talk much more about how I mix my own music, how I record my own music, how I produce my own music a bit more. I'm going to be kind of a little bit more about, hey, I'm going to give you guys all an insight into how I do my work, how I make my EPs. I didn't really do that with the last one, and I kind of wish I had, so I will. I'm going to do that. So And it may be, some people will think, hey, it's a little bit self-indulgent, isn't it? You know, you're just featuring your own music. Well, maybe, possibly, marginally. That's not my intention. My intention is to show you a process that I go through that will hopefully help you go through the same thing. It may give you some tools. It may give you some methodologies that you can grab and say, that works for me. And that's what it's all about, as far as I'm concerned. You know, whether it's self-indulgent or not, I'll let you guys be the judge of that. That's not my intention. My intention is not just to say, hey, I'm just going to, you know, give you, you know, repeats of my music all for every video. No, that's not what it's about. It's about giving you guys a process that you can apply to your own music. And you get to see how I do it. Mistakes, warts, and all. You know, stuff that I get wrong, stuff that I get right. Hopefully, I'm going to bring all of that to you guys so you get to see the whole process. So that's my intention for later this year. Mika Han says, good night all. Just caught the end of the EQ discussion. Great info. And Kyle is still here. Says, the lessons apply regardless of the source of music. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. It doesn't matter what style of music you're involved in, whether you're involved in jazz and acoustic music and folk music like I am, mostly, but I do other styles as well. You know, I do funk, I do soul, I do R&B, occasionally I do hip-hop, not very often, because I don't really know very much about hip-hop music. I have done, just last year, I did a dance record with a client, and he really liked what I did, because it ended up being a little bit, it was a dance record, but it kind of ended up having a little bit of a disco thing going with it. Possibly unintentionally, but that's kind of where it ended up going. But anyway, he really liked it, and I think he may well be coming back to do another record this year. So that will be very cool. That will be another dance record under my belt, if that one comes off. So yeah, so She Studio says, hip-hop? Yes. No, excuse me, I've got a very... one. There we go. Oh, yeah. There go a few more brain cells. Excuse me for sneezing on you guys. I do apologize. Yeah, hip-hop. I don't really know very much about hip-hop. I have played on a hip-hop record. I played some Fender Rhodes on a hip-hop record just before Christmas. And I've done some drum and bass records as well, playing Fender Rhodes or playing Hammond organ, stuff like that. Those kind of things come up every now and then. All right, so we are 15 minutes over tonight, and I hope you've enjoyed tonight's show. I hope you've got a lot out of it. Thank you very much for the great questions. The film score question was a doozy, and the managing the low end question was great as well. And I hope that I answered those questions well. If you have any further questions, or you've got queries of your own, or you've got another suggestion for another Sunday Night Live that we could talk about, please do email me at johnny@johnnylipshamstudios.co.uk. Show suggestions I will take. If you have, I mean, I've got a few already. So a few of you have already sent in suggestions, and I am actually going to do those over the course of the next few weeks. Those questions will be featured. So if you think there's a particular discussion point or something that we can demonstrate in Studio One that you would like to really get a better grasp of, or you think it might be helpful information for everybody else who watches the show, then please do email me, and that will be a feature for a future show. Absolutely. I've got a few. I've got maybe 4 or 5 suggestions now, so I'd like to get a lot more, because I'd like to have a suggestion for each week of the year going forward. That's my aim, so that basically this show becomes about you and your needs, your questions, things that you are interested in, and less about me and what I think you would like, because I can't read your minds. I'm not psychic, so I would really appreciate that input from you guys. And any questions you have, either email me questions or you can stick them in the comments below if you've got something that you would like clarified. All right, folks, I am going to call it the end at that point, and I'm going to say thank you very much, everybody, for coming, and hang on, that was just a message that just came in. I'll deal with that in just a minute. Where was I? Yes. The end of the show. Thanks so much, guys, for coming and watching the show, and I will see you all at 6 p.m. Central Time on Wednesday over at the HST live streams channel for another episode of Songwriting Simplified, the show where you guys get to see Jonny ask me difficult questions on songwriting. And he will more than likely try and surprise me this time. So I hope you enjoyed tonight's show, and I will see you next time. Take care. Good night, everybody.